It was the day of my son's wedding. I sat there in my usual spot, hands trembling as I fumbled with the napkin, my eyes straying to the pristine white flower arrangements that filled the space with an artificial cheerfulness. The music swelled in the background, soft violins playing a melody that was supposed to evoke joy but only brought a bitter weight to my chest. I watched as the guests took their seats, chatting in low voices, their eyes lighting up as the ceremony began. It should have been a moment of pride, but something didn't feel right. The moment the music changed, I turned my gaze forward, waiting for my son to walk down the aisle. That's when it happened. I glanced down at the row, ready to take my place at the edge of the aisle, but there it was, an empty space. The chair that was always reserved for me, right in the front beside my late wife's. Gone. I froze, my heart hammering against my rib cage. At first I thought it was a mistake. Perhaps someone had moved it, misjudged the seating arrangement. But as I scanned the crowd, no one looked me in the eye. No one seemed to acknowledge my confusion. They all pretended nothing was wrong, but I knew. I could feel it deep in my bones. The absence. No one had said a word. Not my son, not his fiancée. No one. I stood up, quietly excusing myself from the row, my legs unsteady as I tried to process what had just happened. How had this been allowed to happen? How could my family, treat me like this? My son's wedding day, a day I had looked forward to for years, was now steeped in something else entirely. A void. An unspoken betrayal. I tried to move through the crowd, but it was like the air had thickened, pushing me back. I couldn't get a straight answer from anyone. Not the wedding planner, not the guests, not even the people I thought were closest to me. They all offered empty smiles, fake pleasantries, but I could see it in their eyes. Something was happening beneath the surface. Something I wasn't supposed to notice. Something I wasn't supposed to understand. But I had to know. I had to find out what was going on. I managed to find my way outside, leaning against the cold stone of the church's entrance. My mind raced, spinning in a whirlwind of disbelief. How could he do this to me? How could my own son, the one I raised, the one I thought I knew, leave me out of this moment? I tried calling him, but his phone went straight to voicemail. My chest tightened as I stared at the empty chair in the distance. It wasn't just a chair. It was a symbol of my place in the family, or rather, the absence of it. I didn't know then what would come next, what the real reason behind this was, what had driven him to make this decision, but I knew this was the beginning of something much darker, something I wasn't prepared for. And yet I would find out, one way or another, the morning after the wedding, when the house was still caught in the hazy aftermath of joy and laughter that seemed to linger too long. I came downstairs to find an envelope waiting for me. It sat there on the kitchen table like a sentient thing, its edges crisp, too sharp for something that should have been a mere formality. The handwriting on the front was unfamiliar, yet the name was unmistakable. From the law office of Lawson and Finch. I stared at it for a long moment before I even dared to touch it. There was something about the stillness of that envelope, the way it seemed to draw all the noise of the house into a muffled silence. The wedding had been a blur, too much happiness, too much pretense, and the feeling of my chair being missing had stayed with me like an open wound. But this was something else. I opened it slowly, each tear of the paper like a whisper of some terrible secret. The letter inside was cold, precise, its words sharp enough to cut into me. Please find attached the legal papers concerning the dissolution of your involvement in the family estate. My hands trembled as I held it, the weight of those words sinking deep into my chest. Dissolution of your involvement. What did that even mean? I could feel the blood drain from my face as I read the next lines. It didn't matter what they said. It was the simple fact that my son, the one I raised, had decided with the stroke of a pen to erase me from everything. My place in the family, the inheritance, the house that I'd helped build with my own hands, all gone. Just like that, I felt sick. I don't even know how long I stood there staring at the paper, not wanting to believe it. Not wanting to accept it. It wasn't just a legal document. It wasn't some cold set of words on a page. It was betrayal. My son had chosen to sever the ties that had bound us for years, and he had done it without so much as a conversation. Without even looking me in the eye, the room seemed to tilt, the walls pressing in on me. My knees buckled and I sank down onto the chair, the paper still clutched in my hands. The weight of it felt like the world on my shoulders. I could almost hear my own heart beating louder in my ears, trying to make sense of what was happening. How had it come to this? How had my own flesh and blood decided I was expendable? I kept thinking about the wedding. About my son, standing there with his new wife, smiling at the altar. I had watched him, proud, full of life, so sure of what he wanted, and I thought I was part of that picture. But what I hadn't seen, what none of us had seen, was the shadow creeping up behind us. The quiet decisions being made without me. Decisions I was no longer included in. And now here I was, sitting alone, staring at the legal papers that felt like a tombstone to everything I had known. I could feel the sting of humiliation deep inside me. To be excluded so completely, to be erased from the very thing I thought was my legacy, it hurt in ways I hadn't anticipated. What had happened to my family? My son, how had we gotten here? I went over every moment, every conversation, every shared glance, and yet nothing seemed to add up. It didn't make sense. Not when you're looking at it from this side of the table, from the side where you're not allowed to sit in your own chair at your son's wedding, where you're not even worth the courtesy of a discussion, where you're no longer seen as part of the picture. I placed the papers down slowly, as if I might break them if I held onto them too tight. My fingers ached from the tension, my mind racing. How could I fight this? How could I get back what was taken from me, when it wasn't just my assets they were stealing? It was my place in the world, my sense of self. I didn't have the answers. I wasn't even sure I had the strength to fight. But what choice did I have? The idea of confronting my son felt impossible, even though every fiber of my being screamed for it. How could I even face him now? After all of this? The phone sat on the counter, silently mocking me, its quiet buzz almost too loud in the space between us. I knew I should call, but I couldn't. I couldn't bear to hear his voice, not yet. Not until I figured out what the hell was happening. I picked up the legal papers again, the weight of them more suffocating this time. I looked out the window where the sun was beginning to dip behind the mountains, the soft orange glow casting long shadows in the yard. The shadows felt like a metaphor for my life now, long, stretching, and impossible to escape. And yet, I couldn't shake the feeling that there was something more going on. Something bigger than just a family dispute. The betrayal was too sharp, too calculated. This wasn't just about money or property, it was about control. It was about something deeper, something that cut to the heart of who I was. I wasn't ready to confront him. Not yet, but I had no choice. I would have to fight. Not just for my share of the estate, but for my dignity, for my place in the world. I had to rebuild. I had to find a way to survive this, but how? The phone buzzed again, louder this time. I glanced at it, but I didn't pick it up. Not yet. I didn't know how to start the fight, but I knew it was coming. The real question was whether I would be strong enough to see it through, or if I would crumble beneath the weight of everything I had lost. The papers lay there on the table. The silence in the house louder than any sound could be. And in that silence I realized there was no going back. This was it. This was my reality now. I would have to find a way to live in it. The quiet was deafening. It wasn't just the silence of the house, though that was part of it. It was the silence in my head, the kind that sits so heavy on your thoughts that it drowns out everything else. I woke up each morning with no purpose, no pressing reason to get out of bed. There were no meetings, no obligations, no one expecting anything of me. It was as if the world had shifted overnight and I no longer had a place in it. I would open my eyes, the soft gray light of dawn creeping through the blinds, and for a second, I could almost fool myself into thinking everything was the same. But then, like clockwork, the realization would hit me. My son, the one I had built my life around, was no longer part of it. My place in the family gone, my purpose vanished, and I was left with nothing but empty rooms, the walls closing in around me. I stood by the window that morning, looking out at the lawn where the grass had grown too long, neglected like everything else in my life. The garden, once full of vibrant colors, now seemed dull, as if reflecting the world I found myself in. It felt like I had been forgotten, like I was an afterthought in a world that had moved on without me. The days blurred together. There were no real moments to hold on to, only fragments of time that slipped through my fingers like sand. I wandered through the house aimlessly, picking up a book only to set it down minutes later, staring at the clock, waiting for something, anything, to give me a reason to keep moving. But there was nothing. I hated it. I hated how the silence filled up every corner of the house, how every sound, even the creak of the floorboards beneath my feet, seemed to mock me. The house that had once been so full of life now felt like a tomb, and I was trapped inside it, with nothing but memories of a time when I mattered. The legal papers, the betrayal, it all weighed on me like a heavy cloak I couldn't take off. I thought about calling my lawyer, reaching out for help, but what was the point? There was no fight left in me. I was a man without purpose, wandering through my own life like a ghost. I tried to shake it off. I told myself I had to get up, to do something, anything to regain control. But the truth was, I didn't know where to start. I had spent so many years serving everyone else's needs, putting my son's future first, making sure the family estate was secure, that I had forgotten how to take care of myself. It wasn't just the loss of the estate that hurt. It was the loss of everything that came with it. My identity, my place in the world, had been tied to that family, to that legacy. Without them, I felt like I was nothing. And now, with the legal battle looming, the only thing I had left was a deep, gnawing sense of fear. Fear that the family I once knew would never return, and that I would never find my way back to who I once was. But one thing was clear. I couldn't keep living like this. I couldn't stay stuck in this endless loop of grief and anger. I had to find a way forward. I had to reinvent myself, but how? How do you rebuild when you've lost everything? I decided to start small. I made myself get dressed, even though the thought of facing the world felt like an insurmountable task. I started taking walks, long ones, through the neighborhood, through the city. I didn't have a destination in mind. I just walked, letting my feet carry me wherever they wanted to go. The world outside felt like it was moving without me, but at least I was moving. At least I was doing something. I began to notice the little things, the way the sun hit the sidewalk in the afternoon, the smell of fresh bread from the bakery down the street, the sounds of children playing in the park. They were small comforts, but they were real. They reminded me that life was still happening, even if it felt like mine had come to a halt. It was on one of these walks that I met her, Mary, the woman who ran the cafe down the road. I had passed by the place dozens of times, but I had never gone inside. On that particular day, something drew me in. Maybe it was the aroma of freshly brewed coffee, or maybe it was the need for some human connection, however small. I walked in, and she looked up from behind the counter, her smile warm and genuine. "Coffee?" she asked, as if it were the most natural thing in the world. I nodded, unsure of what to say. It felt like a lifetime since I'd had a conversation that wasn't strained, that wasn't weighed down by the heavy truths I was carrying. But with Mary it was easy. She didn't ask questions. She didn't push. She simply made me a cup of coffee and let me sit in the corner, letting the world go by as I sipped the warm liquid. We didn't talk much that first day, but somehow it felt like enough. I came back the next day and the next. Every time she greeted me the same way, with a quiet understanding that I didn't have to explain myself. I could just be. The more I visited, the more I realized that something had shifted. The darkness that had enveloped me began to fade, bit by bit. I wasn't ready to face the full weight of what had happened. But Mary's small acts of kindness, her willingness to listen without judgment, her ability to give me space without walking away, reminded me that I wasn't completely alone. But even as I found comfort in these small moments, I couldn't escape the nagging thought that my family was gone. My son was gone. My place in the world, the one I had worked so hard to build, was slipping through my fingers. The legal battle was just the beginning, and though I had made small strides in reclaiming a sense of purpose, I could still feel the weight of that betrayal bearing down on me, like a storm waiting to break. The more I tried to rebuild, the more I realized just how fragile the world I had once known was. The truth about my family, about my son, had shattered everything I thought was certain. And as much as I wanted to move on, to leave the pain behind, I knew that I wasn't ready to let go just yet. Not when there was so much left to fight for. The phone rang that morning, early, just as the first light of dawn began to bleed through the blinds. I had been up for hours, my thoughts tangled in knots, each one pulling tighter than the last. The silence in the house had become unbearable, suffocating even. I had walked around aimlessly, trying to find some semblance of purpose, but it always eluded me. How does one move forward when the very foundation of their life has crumbled beneath their feet? I almost didn't answer the phone. What was the point? I knew it was him, my son. I hadn't spoken to him since the wedding, since the moment my chair had been taken from me, and I had been left standing in the cold. The thought of hearing his voice after everything was too much. But then it rang again, that insistent sound that seemed to break through the thick fog in my mind. And against my better judgment, I picked up, "Hello?" The voice on the other end of the line was sharp, like a knife cutting through the tension in the air. "You have no right to interfere with the family anymore," he said, the words heavy with anger. "Stay out of our lives." I couldn't breathe. It felt like the air had been sucked out of the room. I had imagined every possible scenario for this moment, but nothing had prepared me for this. His words hit me like a physical blow. The son I had raised, the boy I had loved with everything I had, was telling me to stay out of his life. I wanted to scream. I wanted to shout, to tell him everything that was going on in my head, everything I had been holding back. But I couldn't. My throat tightened, and for a moment, I thought I might suffocate from the weight of it all. "Why are you doing this?" I finally managed to ask. The words came out raw, ragged, like they had been stuck in my chest for years. "Why, after everything, after all we've been through, you just throw me away?" He was silent for a moment, and I thought maybe, just maybe, he was going to say something, anything that would explain why he had chosen this path. But then the silence was broken, and his words came crashing through like a storm. "You don't get it. do you?" His voice was cold, distant. "You're no longer part of the family. You lost your place the moment you decided to make everything about you. We've moved on. I've moved on." It felt like the ground beneath me had cracked wide open. My son, my flesh and blood, was telling me he had moved on. And I was nothing more than a distant memory to him now. The pain was unbearable, a sharp aching hollow inside me. How could he say that? How could he just cast me aside like I didn't matter? "You don't get to decide that," I whispered, my voice barely audible. "You don't get to just erase me. I'm still your father." His laugh, bitter and cutting, echoed through the phone. "You're not my father anymore. You're just a man who's in the way. So stay out of it, Dad. Don't make this harder than it has to be." And with that, he hung up. I stood there, the phone pressed to my ear, staring at the wall. The coldness of his words still clung to me like frostbite. My son, my own flesh and blood, he had just told me, in no uncertain terms, that I no longer had a place in his life. And what was worse, he seemed completely unbothered by it. I wanted to shout, to scream at the injustice of it all, but I couldn't. I couldn't even bring myself to cry. It felt like all the tears had been used up already, drained from me in the weeks leading up to this moment. But the emptiness inside, that was still there. Still growing. The house felt even quieter now. The walls seemed to press in on me, suffocating me with the weight of everything I had lost. I walked into the kitchen, staring at the empty spaces. The table that had once been filled with laughter. The chairs that had been home to our family dinners. The kitchen counter that had borne the marks of years of shared memories. All of it was just gone. Nothing left but silence. I didn't know what to do. I didn't know how to fix this. How do you fix something when the person you've loved your entire life has decided you're not worth fighting for? How do you make sense of a betrayal so complete, so total, that it erases everything? I sank into the chair at the kitchen table, my hands trembling. My son was gone, but more than that, he had chosen to leave. He had made a conscious decision to erase me from his life. And the worst part, I didn't even know why. There were no answers, no explanations. Just the cold certainty that I had lost him. And as much as I hated it, a part of me knew it wasn't just him I was fighting for. It wasn't just about regaining my place in his life. I was fighting for something deeper, my own worth, my own dignity. I couldn't let this break me. I couldn't let him break me. But the truth was, I wasn't sure I could survive this. The thought of never hearing his voice again, of never seeing him walk through the door or hear him call me Dad again, was a pain unlike any I had ever known. The betrayal wasn't just about losing my inheritance or my place in the family. It was losing my son, losing my connection to everything I thought I understood about love, about family, about who I was. The phone buzzed again. I glanced at it, my heart leaping in my chest, but I didn't pick it up. It was him, I knew it, but I didn't know what else I could say. What was there to say when the person you loved had already made it clear that they didn't want you in their life anymore? And yet I knew I had to try. If I didn't, I would be left with nothing. No family, no purpose, no reason to keep going. I didn't have all the answers. But I knew one thing. This fight, this battle for my place in his life wasn't over yet. It couldn't be. One morning I found myself at the edge of a cliff. Not physically, but emotionally. The weight of everything, the betrayal, the loss, the endless fight, had pushed me to a place I couldn't recognize. I felt like I was standing on the precipice of something, a chasm that threatened to swallow me whole. The ground beneath me felt unstable, as if every step I took could send me spiraling down into an abyss. And for a while I was lost in it, but then something shifted. It wasn't immediate and it wasn't dramatic. There was no flash of epiphany or sudden rush of clarity. It was just a quiet, almost imperceptible moment when I realized that I didn't want to fall into that abyss. I wasn't ready to give up. I wasn't ready to let everything I had worked for, everything I had fought for, slip through my fingers. I had to pull myself back. The first few days were a blur. I didn't know where to start. I didn't know what was even worth saving. My mind was still heavy with the weight of my son's words, still stung by the coldness of his dismissal. But I knew that I couldn't let that be my story. I couldn't let his rejection define me. I had spent too long being defined by others, by what my family expected, by what society told me I should be. It was time to stop letting those expectations control me. I woke up early the next morning, the sun barely peeking through the curtains, and I made a decision. I would take back control of my life, one small victory at a time. I started simple. I cleaned the house, not because it needed cleaning, but because I needed to feel like I was doing something for myself. I washed the dishes with more focus than I had in weeks, each plate scrubbed with intention, each movement deliberate. There was something strangely comforting about the rhythmic motion of my hands in warm water. And then, I went for a walk. It had become a routine for me over the past few weeks, just walking, letting my mind wander, letting the world around me move while I tried to catch up. But that day, I walked with a different purpose. I wasn't walking to escape the emptiness. I was walking to confront it. With each step, I felt a little less lost. It wasn't that I was finding answers, but rather that I was learning to be okay with the uncertainty. I met a few people on my walks, strangers who smiled at me, who nodded in passing. And for the first time in a long time, I didn't feel invisible. I didn't feel like the world had forgotten about me. I was just a man walking down the street, existing in the same world as everyone else. That felt like a small victory. And in that small victory, I found a glimmer of something new. I began to carve out a life outside the shadow of my family. I joined a book club, something I had always wanted to do but never made time for. I started taking on small projects, fixing things around the house that I had neglected, creating a garden in the backyard that had once been a symbol of my wife's love but had since withered away. I planted seeds, both literal and metaphorical, and I tended to them with care. The more I focused on these small things, the more I realized that I could still have a life without the people who had once defined me. I didn't need my son's approval to be worthy. I didn't need the family I had lost to create a new future. I could build something for myself, even if it was just a small corner of the world where I could breathe. But even as I began to find my footing, I couldn't escape the nagging feeling that my past was still there, lurking just beneath the surface. The battle with my son, the legal papers that had arrived, the empty chair at the wedding, all of it still haunted me, a constant reminder of the betrayal. There were days when the anger would resurface, like a dark cloud moving in across the horizon, threatening to engulf everything I had worked so hard to rebuild. I started questioning everything. Was this reinvention just an illusion? Was I really moving on, or was I simply burying the pain, pretending it didn't exist? Could I ever truly escape the pull of the past? Or would it always be there, waiting for me to slip up, to fall back into the same toxic patterns? One afternoon, as I sat outside in the garden watching the sun set behind the trees, I received a call. It was from my lawyer. "Are you sitting down?" he asked, his voice low, heavy with something I couldn't place. "I've just spoken with your son's lawyer. They're offering a settlement." I froze. The word settlement hit me like a punch to the gut. Was this it? Was this my chance to end the legal battle? To move forward without looking back? Or was it just another way for them to silence me, to keep me from fighting for what was rightfully mine? I didn't know. I didn't know what to do anymore. I had started down this path of reinvention, of rebuilding my life, but now it felt like I was being pulled back into the very thing I had tried to escape. The thought of going back into that battle, of confronting my son once more, was terrifying. It felt like taking a step backward, like undoing all the progress I had made. But then, as I sat there watching the garden I had created with my own hands, I realized something. I wasn't the same person I had been before. I wasn't the man who would shrink in the face of confrontation, who would back down because it was easier. I was stronger now. I had rebuilt myself piece by piece, and I wasn't going to let anyone, least of all my son, take that away from me. The decision was clear. I would fight for what was mine, but I would do it on my terms. I wasn't going to let the past control me anymore. I wasn't going to let my son's actions define my future. I didn't know how this would end, but I knew this much. I had come too far to turn back now. It wasn't over. I thought I had moved on. I thought I was finally carving out a life for myself, finding the strength to let go of the past and everything that had been stolen from me. I had made peace with the fact that my son, my flesh and blood, was gone from my life. The legal battles, the betrayal, the silent rejection, they were all part of the story now. But I was still here, still breathing, still standing. I had been wrong. A month passed, and I had begun to believe that maybe I could survive without him. That maybe the person I had become, this man who could stand on his own 2 feet, was the real me. I found comfort in that thought, in the small victories of each day, the quiet mornings, the peaceful nights, the freedom to make my own choices. It was not the life I had imagined, but it was mine. And for the first time in a long while, I thought I might be okay. But then the doorbell rang. I wasn't expecting anyone. It was the middle of the afternoon, and I was sitting at the kitchen table reading, trying to focus on the words in front of me, when I heard it. That chime. At first I thought it was a mistake, maybe a neighbor needing something. But when I got up to answer the door, I found him standing there, my son. He didn't say a word. He stood there staring at me with a look I couldn't read. It wasn't anger. It wasn't sadness. It was something else entirely. Something unfamiliar, almost like a stranger looking back at me. And in his hands he held an envelope. For a long moment, neither of us moved. I just stood there staring at him, the weight of everything that had happened between us hanging heavy in the air. And then he stepped forward, holding out the envelope. I didn't know what to say. I didn't know what to do. Part of me wanted to slam the door in his face, to push him back into the world he had abandoned me to. But another part of me, maybe the part that still remembered the boy I had raised, the one I had loved without hesitation, reached for the envelope. He didn't speak. He just turned and walked away, leaving me standing there, clutching the note in my hands. The door closed softly behind me as I stared down at the paper, unable to bring myself to open it. The words on the page were brief, almost too simple. I'm sorry. Please come back, just like that. No explanation. No attempt to make things right. No admission of the pain he had caused. Just a plea. A quiet, hollow plea that cut through me like a knife. I didn't know what to think. Part of me wanted to crumble, to fall into the same pattern of yearning for the family I had lost. But the other part, the part that had fought so hard to rebuild my life, knew that I couldn't just let him back in like that. Not without knowing why, not without understanding the full weight of his actions. The silence in the house felt suffocating. I sat down at the kitchen table, the note still in my hand, and stared out the window. The world outside was unchanged. The sun was still shining. The trees still swayed in the wind. Everything was normal. Everything except me. I had been changed by this betrayal, and no simple apology could undo that. I wondered if I could forgive him, if I even wanted to. The hurt, the anger, the betrayal, those were emotions that didn't just fade away with a few words. I had spent so long building my life without him, fighting to reclaim my sense of self, that the thought of letting him back in felt like I would be losing everything all over again. I had fought too hard to let it all go, to let him take me down that path of heartbreak and disappointment again. But could I close the door for good? I had no answers, no clarity, only a deep, gnawing uncertainty that pulled at me every time I thought about it. I thought about the fight we had, the one that had torn us apart, and how, in that moment, I had felt more alone than I had ever been in my life. I thought about the years I had spent sacrificing for him, giving everything I had to make sure he had the life he deserved, only to be discarded when I was no longer useful. How could I just forgive that? How could I open my heart again to someone who had abandoned me so completely? But then I thought about him, my son, the boy I raised. The boy who had once trusted me, who had once looked up to me. Could I really just walk away from that? Could I really turn my back on everything we had once shared, simply because of one mistake? The questions spun around in my mind like a storm, each one crashing into the next, and I couldn't find a way out. The silence in the room pressed in on me, suffocating me with its weight. I felt trapped. Trapped between the man I had become and the father I used to be. I didn't know what to do. And so, I waited. I waited as the hours passed and the sun began to set. I waited, knowing that I couldn't make this decision lightly. I had to decide whether I would let the past define me, or whether I would choose to move forward, no matter how painful it might be. The door was still open. He had left it ajar, and now it was up to me to decide whether I would walk through it or close it for good. I couldn't stay in limbo forever. The tension had built up too much. But the question was, could I forgive him? Could I trust him again? Or had the damage been done beyond repair? I knew I would have to face him eventually. Whether it was today or tomorrow, I couldn't run from this forever. But for now, the only thing I could do was sit in the silence and hope that, somewhere in the depth of my heart, I would find the answer. I met him. It was a strange, almost surreal moment. We sat across from each other in a small, quiet cafe, the same one I had frequented after everything fell apart, the one where I had started to find a sense of peace, even amidst the chaos. He was just sitting there, waiting for me, like he had all the time in the world. And I didn't know what to do with the time I had left. The years between us felt like 1,000 miles of unspoken words, unhealed wounds. But in that moment, I realized that forgiveness isn't about forgetting. It's not about pretending the hurt didn't happen. It's not about erasing the past or sweeping the pain under the rug. Forgiveness is about finding peace in yourself, and maybe, just maybe, finding peace with the person who hurt you most. I stared at my son across the table, his eyes weary, his expression unreadable. He looked older, more worn than the last time I saw him, as if the weight of everything, the decisions he had made, the choices he had lived with, had taken a toll on him too. But there was something else there, something I couldn't quite place, regret maybe, or perhaps just the heavy burden of having to confront the damage that had been done. "I'm sorry," he said, his voice quieter than I had expected. It was soft, almost hesitant, as if the words had to crawl their way out of him. I don't know how to fix this. I don't know how to make it right." I heard the words, but I didn't know how to respond. For so long I had wanted to hear him say something, anything that would make this make sense. I had yearned for an explanation, for a reason, for some acknowledgement of the pain I had endured. But as the silence stretched between us, I realized that it wasn't about the words anymore. It wasn't about making things right. It was about accepting the fact that things had changed. The family I had once known, the bond I had cherished, was never going to be the same. We could never go back to what we were. And maybe that was okay. I took a deep breath, letting the moment settle around me. The truth was, I wasn't sure what I expected from this meeting. I didn't know if it was closure I was looking for or some kind of validation. Maybe I just needed to see him again, to understand if there was any part of him left that still remembered the man who had loved him. "Why now?" I asked, my voice shaky but steady. "Why come to me now, after everything that's happened?" He looked down at his hands, twisting his fingers together, the guilt evident in the way he avoided my gaze. "I don't know, I guess. I've been carrying this around, this weight, and I can't keep running from it. I've hurt you. I've hurt myself too. And I can't keep pretending like it didn't happen." His words hung in the air like a heavy mist, thick with the weight of the past. The betrayal, the anger, the years of silence that had stretched between us, suffocating both of us in its suffocating embrace. And yet, as I sat there, I felt something shift within me, something that I hadn't expected, something that I didn't think I was capable of. I wasn't angry anymore. Not in the way I had been, not in the way that had consumed me for so long. I wasn't looking for revenge or for him to pay for what he had done. I wasn't even looking for him to fix it all. I was just looking for peace, for myself. "I don't know if I can forgive you, son," I said, the words coming slowly, carefully. "But I can't keep holding on to the anger either. I've spent too many nights being angry at you, at myself, and I can't do it anymore." There was a quiet that settled over us, a stillness that felt almost sacred. I looked at him, really looked at him, and for the first time in so long I saw him as more than just the person who had broken my heart. I saw him as the child I had raised, the boy who had once needed me, who had once believed in me. And I realized in that moment that I was still his father. That would never change, no matter what had happened between us. "I don't know if we can ever go back to what we were," I continued, my voice rough. "But maybe we can start from here. Start fresh if that's what you want." He nodded, his eyes glistening with unshed tears, and for the first time in years, I saw something like hope in them. It wasn't much, but it was enough. Enough to make me believe that maybe, just maybe, there was a way forward. The truth was, I didn't need him to come back to me with an apology or a solution or even an explanation. I didn't need him to fix everything that had been broken. What I needed was to find peace with what had happened, to accept the choices we had both made, and to decide that I would not let this destroy me any longer. In that moment, I realized something I hadn't fully understood until now. I wasn't just forgiving him. I was forgiving myself. I was letting go of the idea that the family I had known could ever be whole again. And I was accepting the truth that healing begins not with fixing the past, but with finding the strength to move forward. We sat there for a long time, in that quiet cafe, not saying much but feeling the weight of everything shift between us. And for the first time in so long I felt a glimmer of peace. It wasn't perfect. It wasn't the happy ending I had once imagined. But it was real. It was mine. And that was enough. As I left the cafe that day, my son walking beside me, I realized that forgiveness doesn't always mean the past is erased. It doesn't mean the hurt goes away, but it does mean that we choose to move forward, together or apart, with the understanding that peace begins within. And maybe that's all we can ever really ask for. The future was uncertain. The road ahead was still long. But for the first time in a long time, I felt like I could walk it without the weight of the past crushing me, and that was more than enough.